Up the front, we need to remove the connections on the heater core here and also the expansion valve here for the air conditioning. So we need to remove the battery and remove the battery tray, remembering underneath the battery tray is the controller for the fuel pump, so you'll just need to lift that up, disconnect that plug and then take it all out of the way. And to remove the expansion valve is actually pretty simple in this car. The actual pipes are just held in by this little bracket here, and there's a single 10mm nut which I'm going to remove, and then these just wiggle out. It's pretty easy, especially to grab hold of the high pressure connection point there. Just to pull that out, you can actually unclip it out of these spots over here on the left hand side if you need to as well. These ones over here, just to allow it to come free, but it actually pops out surprisingly easily. And then once we've got that off and we've moved that out of the way, and generally what I'm going to do is the moment these pipes come out is I'm going to cover them. I don't want to get any garbage inside them, so I'm going to cover those in cling film immediately and put a cable tie around them. And then I'm going to remove the expansion valve, and the expansion valve just has a couple of little Allen key screws which screw all the way into the evaporator pipe back here, and then that'll just wiggle straight out. So with that screw out, there'll be two O-rings in the pipes which will just pull easily out of the expansion valve. And there we go. And the connections themselves, this bracket here stays on this pipe here. This one's free, so I'm just going to put it like that, cover them in cling film, and then just clamp them up here somewhere. And with the pipes removed and sort of taped up there, I can just use an Allen key here. It's a 3mm, just to remove those two screws. And that expansion valve, I've already pulled that out, so that just sort of fell out, but you should just need to just wiggle that out and it should just pop out straight away. There are a couple of O-rings on the inside there that you would replace like you would do the two up there. To remove the heater core pipes, the book talks about draining the coolant, which is a complete pain, but you don't have to do that. So what I'm going to do, and you need to sort of get yourself a bit organised to do this, is that these are 19mm inside diameter hoses. And so once we disconnect them, what I'm going to do is actually have a pipe with 19mm connections on it, so I can just shove them on there straight away. I'm going to have a bunch of rags in here. A little bit of coolant will come out because this is slightly lower than the level of the coolant in the expansion tank out the back. So it will actually come out a little bit, you won't lose much. And if you just put rags down here, it'll just collect there, and then you can leave that hose on there whilst you pull the air conditioning unit out. To remove these clips here, they're kind of a groovy clip in that they've got this clip here, so when you squeeze them together, they actually clip open, and then you can easily move them out of the way. You just need a pair of, I just use these, pair of long multi-grips that actually move a fair way when you actually pull them in, because they actually need to grab these things. There we go, so it's clipped together like that, and now we can just move that out of the way. So we just move that down the bottom, and we can do that for both of those. The rubber surround at the back of this might get in the way. Don't push it all the way in, because that's the thing that's going to stop coolant from getting in the cabin later on when a little bit leaks out. And you're always going to get some sort of leakage when you do this sort of thing. So you might just need to pull those pipes out like that a little bit. To get these free now, these are always going to be a bit of a pain because they've been sitting there for years in the coolant, and it's disconnecting them is always hard. First thing I'm going to do is get a pick tool like that and just sort of stick it in the top and sort of run it around to try and loosen it as much as I can. But what I've found with these is if I just get a pair of big multi-grips like that and I just squeeze them in and actually get a really good grip on the pipe or on the hose, not on the pipe underneath it, and then just do that, and eventually after maybe 10 seconds or so, just wiggled it all free, so now it was all loose. Now, it didn't do any damage to the hose, but if you do damage it, to be honest, these pieces of hose here are just 19mm inside diameter heater hose, and mate, there's $1 worth of hose there. So it would be very cheap to replace those if you did actually damage them. So this is the pipe that I'm going to use. I've got two 19mm outside diameter connections. This isn't just a piece of 19mm heater hose. And what I'm going to do is pull these off one at a time. You can see I've pulled this down, so it's most of the way down. And all I need to do is pull it out, shove one of those in one of them, pull out the other one, and then shove it in the other, and then it'll be nice and sealed. Now, I've already done this once. I probably lost, I reckon, 50ml of coolant total. And so with all the rags down there, that'll just catch all of that. It was surprising how little actually came out. And then what I'm going to do is blow all the coolant out of the heater core, so when I bring it inside, I don't end up getting any coolant in there. There we go, and now because they're flexible hoses, they can just get pulled straight out of the way there. And so what I'm going to do is put a container under there, put some compressed in there, put my finger around with a rag so it seals it nicely, and then just blow all of that out so I empty out the heater core. On the underside of the air conditioning unit, this is the drain for all the condensed water. There's a clip there. That's pretty simple. You just sort of push it. It's got a bunch of barbs in there. You just push it like that, and then that'll open, and this thing just pulls off really easily. And with the expansion valve removed and the heater core hoses disconnected, I can now push these things in. I'm not sure if you noticed, but that's actually then allowing the whole unit to move on the inside, and now I'm just going to pull it out. And so from the inside, with the bracket here removed, the connections on the other side disconnected, and the one underneath it for the condensed water disconnected, and I sort of pushed it a little bit from the inside. It says to support it with a box or a piece of wood or something like that, because that's just sitting there loosely, and now I should be able to just pull it straight out. There you go. That's actually very light. I've taken the motor out of it already. I was just having a poke around this morning, but that's actually very light. And now with the air conditioning unit out of the car, there's this big piece of insulation here. That can just get gently removed and put to the side ready for your installation. This is the air conditioning unit that sits behind the dashboard. What my plan is here is I'm just going to have a quick talk through about where all the components are, how it works, etc. And then I'll pull it apart and show you how to service things. So starting from the left here, and just before I start, this is from a right-hand drive car. So the motor and everything is on the left-hand side as you look at it from the cabin. It would be on the other side for a left-hand drive car, from what I understand. This bit in the middle is the same, so it uses the same evaporator and heater core for both left-hand, right-hand drive cars. However, this bit on the back that attaches to this and the remainder is a bit different, so everything's over the right-hand side for a left-hand drive car, but where the motors are to control things remain the same. So we've got the blower here on the other side of this. This is where it would be hard against that firewall. There's actually no connection point here. It just presses up hard against it with a foam pad here. And then on the other side here is where that first filter goes through, that's under the front lid. You've got two motors here that control where the air actually comes from. One is to actually control whether or not it actually comes from the outside or from underneath on the inside of the cabin. And the other one is actually to stop ram air. So I'm assuming there is this sort of a little baffle in here, which we'll pull apart and have a look at in a moment. But it looks like it controls, if you're going at speed and you've got the external air selected, to stop actually lots of air just being pushed in, is my understanding of it. You've then got what they call the blower resistor, which is the thing that actually controls the blower fan speed. You've got the second of the two filters in here, and then it runs through the back here. And at the back here, you have firstly it goes through the air conditioning evaporator, and then the heater core, and then it goes through a bunch of flapper valves here. So you've got the ones at the top here, and I just sort of turn that on its top here so you can see the valves that we've got. But the one here is for windscreen defog. These two here are connected and they join to the front parts of the 4 outlets on the dashboard. The inner one here is separate and it actually goes to the center 2 vents, the rear portion of that. So that bit there and these 2 are separate items. And then finally you've got the footwells for either side. Each of the footwells, so they have a pipe that actually would go down towards your feet on either side. That just gets pulled off. There's a single one of those plastic screws here on this side, and on the other one there is a single torque screw that gets removed from the frame, and then they just pop straight out. There is a temperature sensor for each one of those. There is a temperature sensor, and we'll have a look at that in a moment, over here, which tells us the inlet temperature. And there's also another one, actually I think it's down in here, I have to pull it apart later on, but that is to tell you the temperature after the air conditioning evaporator. The 8 stepper motors that control the flapper valve, so there are 2 here, and then there are 3 on each side here. They're all exactly the same part. Interestingly, Porsche, from looking at the parts list, don't actually sell those separately, which is a bit weird, but they do actually have a Porsche number. The whole system is made by Bear, and you can actually get these separately. So I'll put some part numbers at the end of the video for the different items, but these can actually be bought separately. I've seen those on Pelican parts for about 25 bucks US a piece, so they're pretty cheap. But the nice thing is they're all exactly the same. The blower here is something that is used in a whole bunch of different air conditioning units, so that can actually be bought separately, quite happily, rather than from Porsche. One of the things that isn't so good about this unit is that the evaporator and the heater core aren't sold separately. You have to buy this entire unit as one, which is pretty crazy. I'm not sure if they will start to do that in the future, but every time I look at any parts or anything for this, it always drives you to just buying the entire unit, which to be honest is rubbish. The heater core, if you put good coolant in the system, then the heater core should basically last forever, but air-conditioned evaporators, they don't last forever. And to have to buy the entire system rather than just replace the evaporator is pretty mad. A number of these items look like they can be replaced while the thing is in the car. Certainly the blower, the final stage resistor here, as well as some of these motors, the stepper motors, could be replaced, especially those on the driver's side that are fairly freed up. Whereas some of these, like for example this one here, you actually have to separate this whole thing, which means getting this whole unit out of the car to actually replace which is the temperature controller for either side. The center one of each of the 3 motors controls the temperature on each side. So if that's not working, then you have to pull this whole unit out. This one on the top here, which controls the windscreen defog. Whilst you can actually get this out, when you're actually looking at it inside the car from upside down, that's what you're looking at, and be able to get your hands up here behind the dashboard and the bracket, that big metal bracket that sits about there somewhere, is going to be pretty hard. So don't know how replaceable some of these items are. This one in here, clearly you're not going to be able to replace, which is for the ram air. For the one on the left hand side here, the side of the car is about there, so you might be able to get your hands up in there. Again, don't really know until you sort of have to replace that stuff. On the other side of the unit, the connection points for the heater core here, and for the air conditioning, the expansion valve sits at the top of that, and then those 2 pipes come in that go down the back to the compressor. You've got this one here that actually, you've got these little hoses that just pushes straight on and pulls straight off. You just get your fingers underneath here and pull that down. And this one here just sits, and it's just sort of a seal that just sits over the surround of that. So they're pretty easy to put on, and these actually push through that firewall at the start. So you actually put these on prior to installation, and they push through, and then you pull it around the actual metal of the firewall at the front. On the underside of the unit, things that you'll see when you are looking in from underneath, this is where that filter there lives. That's actually got a direction of flow indicator when you install that inside the cabin, so make sure you get that right. There are 3 clips there that need to go on. The firewall is going to be there so that air from outside comes in there. This flapper valve here, which actually is controlled by the one on the outside, that will actually move to allow either air to come in from here or come in from here to allow air to come in from the cabin. Once it's removed from the car like this, the first thing we need to do is separate the 2 items, and the join is in here. There are 2 screws, one on this side here and one down here, and this thing just pulls apart pretty easily. Prior to doing that, we just need to disconnect the harness points. All the harness will actually stay with this bit here, and we're just going to disconnect all the points on the other side for the flapper valves. We're going to disconnect this plug connection here. This is where the main power comes in to actually go to the blower motor, which you disconnect before actually pulling it out. We're just going to disconnect all of that and just have that flop over there. But once you disconnect those 2 screws or remove those 2 screws down here, this whole thing can be pulled apart. I must point out that every screw in this is exactly the same, so it's really nice. It doesn't matter whether it's for a blower motor or the things that hold the whole thing together, they are all exactly the same. So you can just put them in a bucket and put them in all back later on. And then once those 2 screws are removed, this just pulls apart like that. We'll have a look at this bit first for the blower motor itself, and this can be done quite happily when this unit is in the car. You'll have that cold air, in the footwell, you'll actually have that piece of foam here, which you'll just have those plastic screws which you'll need to remove. There'll be that single harness or plug connection there which you can remove, and then there are 4 screws around the perimeter which need to come out. Not the big ones here or on the outside, just the 4 in here. And with those 4 screws removed, that just pulls straight out. There's your blower there. Now in the car, you've got the dashboard sitting here, and you've got the glove box in front of it. The workshop manual doesn't talk about removing the glove box to be able to do this, so I can only assume that there is enough room to be able to pull that out with the dashboard, with the glove box still in place. If you're struggling, maybe you need to remove the glove box. And once this is out, that's, I guess, the blower motor by itself, but you can actually separate this housing. There's just a couple of clips on the outside. And then it just rotates off sort of a pivot point at the back here like that. And then that just goes like that, and it just comes out. And the nice thing about that is one of the problems that these blower motors have is they kind of seize on the bushings. There's obviously one here at the back, and there's one inside there. And I've had this happen a couple of times in my car where the thing doesn't actually start to turn, and you actually need to unclip on the outside under the front boot the housing there and get your finger here and actually get that to turn to actually make that thing start to work again. And so the nice thing about putting this cover off here is you can get access to that back bush there. So you just put a drop of oil of that on that. Put a bit on the front as well. You can just get a little eyedropper or something to get some oil in there. Give that a bit of a spin, and that hopefully should stop that problem of that thing seizing. Putting this thing back together again is pretty simple. There are a bunch of pads around the outside of that one. It's in the middle like that goes on that one there. And then this one just clips over the other side. There we go. Next thing here is the blower resistor. So this big plug there, you just squeeze in, and that can easily be done from inside the car. With this installed in the car, and then it just pulls out. Basically the way these work, there's a bunch of resistors inside, and signals that come from the air conditioning system say how much power it actually wants out. Problem is that these things get stinking hot, which is why it has all this stuff to cool it, and basically it's in the airflow that first comes from the blower. So that's easily just rotated out and replaced if required, and then just rotated back in. The only other things that you might need to do, because all of this is just plastic, you can pull it apart if you want to, but at the front here, this front bit just unclips off. You just turn it upside down, there's a couple of clips here. We just do that, and this thing just comes straight off. That's just a plastic housing with not much in it, but this holds those two flapper motors and the actual two baffles inside. I'll just remove those and we'll have a look at what's going on there. So this is the one on the outside here. They just pull straight off. They're all exactly the same. There's a hex key on the inside, and as you can see, that just allows that to move back and forth. There's a little thing that allows that to happen. Putting those back on, obviously the hex key needs to be aligned with the one on the other side there, and they just push straight on. There's always going to be a couple of pins for the 4 holes, 2 of them have pins and 2 of them have screws. You may need to adjust these, just move them back and forth a little bit to get those to go on. There we go. On the other side, which is the ram air one, which is the one on the inside. That's this little one here, which doesn't actually block off all the air. I think it's just a sort of a baffle to stop excessive air from blowing in if you're going at speed. Looking at the main part of the unit, this is where the air is going to go in here. The air conditioning evaporator sits there. You've got the heater core there, so the air is going to come in. All the air is actually going to go through the evaporator from the air conditioning, and there's going to be a baffle inside which determines whether or not the air actually goes through the heater core or not. You've got a temperature sensor here that is for the temperature post the air conditioning evaporator. Simple plug there that just gets pulled out, and all of these temperature sensors, they just get pulled out like that really easily, but that can stay in here. And we're just going to separate this now and actually pull off this big bit on the bottom, which allows us access to the heater core and the air conditioning evaporator. There's just a whole load of screws all the way around the side of this, as well as another couple on the top up here, and once those are removed, this thing just slides straight off. And with all of those screws removed, this can now just get pulled up and off. Whilst you're doing that, just hold on to the evaporator hoses there, because there's a big bit of foam here that will probably get just jammed inside. That will try and want to lift it out, and also it's going to be kind of stuck in this housing here. So just do that and just pull it up and off. There's nothing really on the inside there. You can see in the bottom there, that is that drain at the that actually goes to underneath the driver's carpet to actually drain all the condensation post evaporator out of the car. But this is our evaporator here that just gets pulled up and out really easily. And there is our heater core. What you'll notice is this is actually very clean inside. I know the car's only got 60-odd thousand kilometres on it, but it's very clean. So the 2 filter system that they've got on it works really well. And to remove the heater core, you've just got a thing on the other side here that just holds it in place. That could obviously have been easily removed before, but it's just got a single screw on it. And now, if you turn that over, that can easily be removed. So there's our heater core. If you need to separate any of these because maybe you've got some broken baffles inside or something like that, we'll need to remove all the motors. Now you notice I've got those marked. Obviously they're interchangeable, but the problem is that because of where those hex keys are on the inside, if I don't put them back in the same spot, it's actually hard to get them on in the position that you actually want where they were at the start. And the big things I'm worried about are the ones at the top here, because I don't want those sticking up when I install it later on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to disconnect all the harness. The harness itself just stays with the unit. It's connected on both sides and it doesn't need to come off. But then when you actually remove those motors, we'll have a look at what's actually going on inside there. Something I've noticed with these plug connections The plunger is at the back here, but it's actually really hard for a lot of these to actually push it down far enough. So I find that if you just get a screwdriver and push it in that gap there, like that, hopefully you can see that, it actually seems to allow those to come out much more easily. And especially if you were working in the car, trying to get your hands up here, a small screwdriver down in that gap in there is going to make it much easier to remove. With all the screws on those motors, they can all just pull straight off like that. And they all have direct drives to something on the inside, except the only one that's a little bit different is this one here, which actually has like the hex drive of the motor goes in there, and then that makes this thing in here rotate. And we'll have a look at what each of those does. So I'm just going to go through now which of the stepper motors in their positions actually controls which item. Just starting on the back left here, moving that one controls the defog. On the back right here, which is that one that had that little funny attachment to the motor, it controls those there, which are the 4 front vents on the dashboard, so the ones that go to your face. The one at the front here controls that center one, and that's the one that actually goes to the forward parts, so the upper parts of those center dashboard vents. On the underside, these ones here, and these are the temperature controllers, so that's going to change how much is actually just, for example, that's blocking off completely the heater core, that one's opening up the heater core, so obviously where that moves changes how much actually comes through the evaporator or the heater core. And they are controlled by so that is the right hand side as you looked at it from the cabin, that one there, and a similar position on the other side there on the left hand side. And the last controller here is for the foot vents. There's this one here, so this is going to be on the left hand side lower. I'm not sure if you can see in there with the light, but there are flapper valves in there that actually control the foot vents. Prior to installation in the car, actually that foam that came out with it that we removed earlier, that needs to go back on. Also, you notice there are 2 slots here for some guide pins to help you align when you get into the car. There are those 2 black things. So there's alignment pins of those things there.